So I want to say welcome to everyone. This is our Gates Cambridge workshop in the fall. We usually run this as early as we can in the fall semester because there's still just enough time for anybody to squeeze in an application for the Gates Scholarship. If you're not familiar with the Gates Scholarship, the Gates funds a graduate degree at the University of Cambridge in the UK. There are lots of different options for what those grad degrees can be. But I will preface this by saying it is, they have a strong preference for students pursuing a DPhil, which is a PhD, or a 2-year master's degree, which are usually the MPhils. There are a lot of 1-year grad degrees at Cambridge, and they occasionally award Gates scholarships to those, but their preference, their very strong preference for American applicants is that you are there for 2 years or longer because they really want you to be part of the Gates scholars community. So that's something to keep in mind. Poor Ryan is having issues joining us and is sad. We're going to keep trying with him. I don't know how else to get him on here. Let's see. Let's just see. Sorry, it's going to be hard to email and talk to you guys at the same time. How many of you are familiar with the Gates website? Has anyone looked at that recently? I'm going to share my screen. So that's going to be a better use of our time to kind of walk through some of the pieces of Gates rather than have you all stare at me and me stare at a blank screen. So I'm going to share, first of all, the page, the actual Gates page. So hopefully some of you have seen this page before. Gates is really wonderful. They give you a lot of examples and information. They're not hiding anything about what they're looking for in applicants. It's pretty straightforward. Big picture wise, the Gates Cambridge application is essentially a graduate application to the University of Cambridge to the particular program that you want to study. And then you click a box that says you would like to be considered for Gates funding as part of that. And then from there, you would add an extra essay and an extra letter of recommendation that would be considered by the Gates Foundation. So that's what's going on in terms of the application. So it's unlike some other fellowships where the focus is a really robust fellowship application. This is a graduate school application with then some interest from the Gates Foundation. This also has a lot to do with how you're chosen. So you first have to be accepted by the department for the graduate degree at Cambridge, and then that department has to actually shortlist you before they would pass your application materials on to the Gates Foundation. This is a reason why the academic component is incredibly important to this application, but it's actually not something that the Gates Foundation itself looks at as much because by the time they see your application, you would already have had to have been accepted into Cambridge, right? So you have to have a strong enough application to get into Cambridge or grad school, impress your department so that they want to shortlist you, and then have a strong extra essay and letter of recommendation to become part of the Gates Scholar community. Ryan, are you with us?
Yes, yeah, I'm here.
There you are.
Hey, sorry, yeah, I was struggling trying to get a connection for some reason. It kept giving me an error. I haven't used this platform before.
Oh, well, welcome to our platform. So are you on a phone or are you on your computer?
The phone right now.
Phone right now, okay, that's probably better. So I just gave a quick overview of Gates. What I might do, since you're having some connection issues, is actually might go ahead and feature you first so that you have a chance to talk. And then that way, if we lose you, I'll just pick up and keep going and talk about the Gates. Does that sound okay to everybody? Everybody else? We'll hear from the expert. And then from me. Yeah, okay. Ryan, I have a couple of starter questions for you, and then I'm going to mute myself. But if you could just give us a little bit of your background from USC and then what you're doing at Cambridge, and then probably the story of how you applied for the Gates, not once, but twice.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, thank you. I think, yeah, so a little bit of background about myself is I graduated in 2017 in biomedical engineering. And the year before me, Eric actually had gotten he received the Gates, and he was chemical engineering, and that's actually where I first learned about it. And so when I got to speaking to him about it, I never been to Europe before, or never even like considered, I never even traveled really much, and so I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll consider throwing in an application. Actually, Jen and Novella were so instrumental in being able to, not only encouraging to be able to apply, which I think is one of the biggest assets that I think coming from UofSC, having the support network, that I can truly say that some of the other universities do not have this kind of office that came to them to apply for these fellowships. So I think that sort of helped push me to be able to look at applying. Originally, I had received the Goldwater, and that I think might have helped in some regards, but for the most part, I think the biggest thing that had helped me to consider applying and to really go for it too was finding a good supervisor, someone who would really support my application, someone who would really just be able to basically read over it, give me some recommendations on what I could work on during a PhD or a master's. A few things have changed, I know, since I had got there. So I applied for, originally, like I said, the MPhil for chemistry, and this was in order to do Alzheimer's disease research. So I had originally done Alzheimer's disease research in Dr. Melissa Moss's lab, and we ended up basically continuing a lot of that research with someone who was currently doing that over in Cambridge. And I applied for Gates, and to be honest, I didn't even get considered for an interview or anything. I ended up applying for about probably 6 fellowships. It ended up being one of which was what's called a Whitaker. It's similar to like Fulbright, and that actually was able to fund me. So I think that was another thing that really helped, was just applying for so much different funding sources to be able to go over there. Because it's at that level, at this level, I think most people, on this call too, are quite qualified for it. I think sometimes it comes down to somewhat luck, and sometimes the application process for that and who's viewing it at that moment in time. And so I ended up going there for 1 year for a master's, for an MPhil in chemistry, and I enjoyed the lab the first few months, and my supervisor had encouraged me to then apply for the PhD. And so same supervisor again, so a PhD in chemistry now, and I had done that. And I'll be quite frank, and this kind of goes back to how it's sort of who's viewing your application at the time. But I had a very, very similar application to the one that I had applied to the previous year, and this time, the interview. You're hearing me, right? I'm gonna have to.
I think we're losing you there, Ryan.
Yeah, you're losing me here. Yeah, I thought so.
We lost you there for a second.
Can you hear me now? Is that fine?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and so I think that really, I think that was quite interesting because, at that level, now when I was applying for the PhD for the Gates, I was now considered an international rather than an American applicant, and so and Jen will be able to explain that a little bit more in detail. But in any case, that time I actually received it and got the interview and received the scholarship. So I think some of it was an interesting pathway. I think when I speak to a lot of the other scholars too, they've also had different ways of getting there. But I think, to be honest with you, the support that I would receive, Jen looking over my application, also Eric, Eric Bringley, he's the other one that had came from USC. He also allowed me to look at his application, and I encourage you all to, reach out to me too, and I'd be happy to read over anyone's as well, while you're applying too. And does that give you a little quick background, an overview, Jen? Or
yeah, no, I think so. That's helpful. I mean, the key pieces are you applied more than once, and I do think sharing the part about once you were there and had the connection with the faculty, that your application hadn't actually changed that much from year to year. It was now the institutional status that you had that helped you to be successful. Are you doing? We kind of lost you there. So hopefully Ryan will come back. I do think that the importance of having someone in the department who is familiar with your application, that you have reached out to or connected with to talk about your interest in the program, so that you have a champion or a cheerleader when your application comes across the desk of the department, makes a big difference in being successful with Cambridge. I think it can be hard. You could have the best possible application and the department might be really impressed with you, but if they don't know that application is coming and they don't know, or they're not really registering that you're also applying for Gates, sometimes you can get lost in the shuffle and not get passed on to Gates. So if you've not already sort of dug into graduate programs at Cambridge and reached out to potential faculty mentors there, that is a really good step and an important one to show your seriousness of purpose in identifying Cambridge, the place that you want to go to grad school. So I think that's one of the key pieces, one of the key takeaways from Ryan's experience. Ryan, if we have you back, one of the things I would love for you to talk about while we have you is just life at Cambridge and life as a Gates Scholar, because I think the educational system is a little different. I think people get freaked out by an application that asks them to choose their college, and that's a very different understanding of what college is than here in the U.S. So if you could help us understand a little bit about what life at Cambridge is like, involved.
Yes, and that's actually a good point, Jim. I think if you guys can hear me, I think emphasizing why Cambridge really, I think, helped to actually improve my application the second time around. And I think being able to have that perspective allowed me to maybe be able to explain it in a better way, especially during my personal statement. So Cambridge, exactly right. It is slightly, well, much more different than the universities, the college system and things like that, for better or for worse. So as you may or may not have read online, the college system, Cambridge is split up into 31 colleges. A similar idea is there at Oxford University. And when you're applying, one thing that will come up on your application will be you're going to specify your top 2 preferences for a college. And this is something that Eric Bringley actually, he never gave, and I'll be honest, I never gave too much thought about it either, but I think he one of the things he regretted was not giving it enough thought when I hope he's not on this call, but I don't know, but if he, one thing that I think he regretted was not giving it more thought in what college he'll apply for. And when I was applying, my supervisor, he was actually in charge of one of the colleges, so he encouraged me to join that one. But it's something that's quite hard to do. So usually when Americans are applying, they Google the different colleges and sort of see the various different systems on it. So when you come to Cambridge, it's split up into 3 different, you'll join 3 different basically groups. You'll join your department, you'll join the university as a whole, and you'll join the college. Sometimes within that department, you'll join that lab. And each one is a lot more decentralized than they are in the States. And so when you're picking those top 2, I highly encourage to definitely look into seeing the differences in funding sources. Some of them, like St. John's, Trinity, even Churchill, I believe, has an American one. They have specific ones that you're able to be considered for additional funding. Then if you don't receive the Gates, you can get funding through the college. To be frank, some of the other colleges, they don't have as much wealth for one reason or another, and so or maybe some are more focused on sports, some are more focused on academia, and so I would encourage you to look into those a little bit more. I'd be happy to go into more detail on the differences in the colleges, but it's it's an interesting system in that regard. When you apply, you'll definitely receive a college. It might not be your first choice or your second choice, but everyone gets a college, and that's sort of like your community. And it's actually a place where myself and actually Eric met most of our friends was through our college. And then it's a great social network outside of the lab, outside of your own research. One thing I think I didn't get to mention too, Jen, from before was I know that the recently, and you could probably vouch for this too, but I've been listening in some of the trust discussions on their focus in the coming years. And I know that they're accepting more PhDs now rather than masters, 1 year masters and things. I think this is something that's actually is actually more important than I think it's being considered before, because I think now they really encourage them to focus on some of one of those research pathways and joining it. I think the 1 year the reason they've done this switch, one reason was for funding, but the second one was because a lot of the students would leave after 1 year, and so it wasn't able to build Gates community as much. And so that's just something to definitely consider while all the applicants are applying. And you've known that, Jim, but I just want to emphasize to the other students here to give serious thought.
That's helpful to highlight. I did mention that I think earlier before you got on. I think last year I was looking at, there's about 35 Gates scholars from the U.S. every year, and I think in the last round, only 3 of those 35 students were not either a DPhil or an MPhil program. So yeah, they're not kidding about this preference for 2 years or more at Cambridge, and I think it's exactly right. It's that they're trying to build this sense of community, and they want that longer-term engagement by scholars. So I think that makes sense. That would lead me then, Ryan, to ask you if you could share, like, what have been the benefits aside from the actual financials of being a Gates scholar? What does that community look like for you?
Yes, yeah, and so the Gates the Gates community, when you join in as a Gates, I think there's 3 big benefits actually when you join in. One was sort of that community. So it's broken down into 45% Americans, usually 55% international students, and I think they stick to that quite strictly. And it's nice though because you get to meet a lot of people from all over who are very social. I think we usually team up with a lot of the Rhodes scholars as well as like a joint Gates Rhodes things. And I have noticed I am definitely biased, but the Gates community is a lot more open to talking with the students. They're a lot more out to help the world. Which is great. I think they're a little bit more social than a lot of the Rhodes, and so we have always talked about it as a little bit of a rivalry, of course. I think the community is quite a good one, and it's a small niche community where you go they different weekend retreats and things like that sort. The second thing I think is regards to your future career. So being a Gates scholar will definitely open doors. I know some students are interested in consulting. I know that these major firms in consulting, they have a representative specifically dedicated to Gates scholars just to like recruit you and help you get into some of these major firms. Same goes along with some of the big banks or whatever your career path might be. It opens up doors because it's an easy way for recruiters to say, oh, they've already shown success. We're going to go ahead and bypass some of the application interview process. So I think academic wise, that's the second big thing. And the third one was like you mentioned, Jen, the financial aspect of that, and that actually they just increased the financial stipend this past year, and so you do get paid better than most students there at Cambridge, most research students there at Cambridge. And so it gives you a lot more that you're able to spend on trips to ever going places and different activities. And they really do care about it. They provide hardship funding. Having that just sort of makes things in life a lot easier, especially when you're over abroad, because they'll, for example, I'm actually back in Ohio right now, and they were able to fly out the scholars back to their home countries because of the COVID situation, and then they're able to fly us back to Cambridge afterwards, and that wasn't an option for any of the other scholarships that I've talked to with my friends. Most of them actually had to stay in Cambridge during the lockdown.
Wow, that's an interesting benefit. It says a lot about
yeah.
Gates and our world right now, so that's pretty good. I think those are all the questions that I had just to kind of get people started listening to what your experience was, Ryan. So actually, I will invite anybody who has questions for Ryan. You can either type it in the chat and we'll see. I can read those to him, or I can stop sharing my screen and you all could actually, raise your hand or ask your question. So I'll leave that open to you guys. Any questions for Ryan? No questions for Ryan. Go for it. Kamikin, yes.
Oh, okay. So I have a question. So you were talking about it's for a graduate degree program. At what stage can you start preparing for that, and like what would you need per se? So like, do you have to be like in extracurriculars, or do they just want someone that's really into the research, or is it like I don't know, like what would you do specifically to start going towards that direction?
Towards graduate school at Cambridge in general, yeah, I mean, they're really, I'll answer Ryan. I don't know if you have thoughts on that. I want to jump in, but I mean, in general, you want as strong an academic background as possible because you're applying for an advanced degree in your field. So, taking challenging classes and doing well, getting to know your faculty so that you have strong letters of recommendation within your field. Research, whatever that looks like in your particular field of study, if it's a STEM field, lab research, but research is possible in humanities and social science too. Anything that shows you have a depth of knowledge in a particular area of interest. Applying for previous national fellowships to give you experience in terms of getting yourself down on paper and getting to know faculty who can speak on your behalf. Those would be some quick tips that I would have. Ryan, what might you say? Or Novella, you can chime in too in terms of Ryan.
Yeah, I definitely agree that that's all important. It's interesting in that at university level in the U.S., we're always talking about extracurriculars and how important they are. To be frank, I mean, Cambridge doesn't really care. So in your application, you'll have I think it's like 5 spots for any other, or you can, I think it's maybe 1,000 characters or something, where you could talk about all your other extracurriculars. They do put that in perspective. I know the Gates really likes it, and you can emphasize that in your personal statement. The department, at least in my experience and some of my fellow colleagues, they don't really care, and the college somewhat cares. So yeah, exactly what Jen was saying. I think the fellowships really stand out. I think that was a key thing. Research things really stand out. And they do like it. It's sort of a cherry on top when you have some extracurriculars, but I think having that is pretty important. But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, other questions?
Yeah, thank you.
It is a good question. There's a lot to consider when applying. I mean, I think with Gates, the key is it is an academic scholarship, so that's what the focus is going to be on. And then Gates itself might want to know a little bit more about you. Because remember, I mean, we haven't really talked about this, but like sort of catchphrase for the Gates Foundation for the scholarship is your commitment to improving the lives of others. So activities that demonstrate that certainly can include and should include your academic work, but can also be expressed more broadly. So I think that's why they're the audience for the broader things that you're doing. But getting into Cambridge, it's, you know, in this field of study, how well do you know it? Prove it, that kind of thing. So, other questions for Ryan? I know Novella asked Ryan, what do you miss the most about USC?
Actually, to be honest with you, I miss the campus. Cambridge doesn't have a very good gym. They don't have a very good like some of these other ones. But I know, so I was actually there a few months ago visiting friends and walking around, and USC has a beautiful campus. Cambridge, it's old, which is really cool. Um, but it sometimes the modernness at USC I liked a lot. Like I like having nice rooms rather than 200-year-old rooms. But personally, that's what I miss.
That's pretty good. It's nice to know that USC stands up to Cambridge.
It does, definitely, especially weather-wise too. One thing. Oh yeah.
Today we're having
Maybe not
like
today.
we have a thunderstorm right now, but um, I don't know.
That's true. Cambridge, it's always rainy and stuff, but I think it should be good. Are most students here, are they applying for MPhils or PhDs or?
That's a good question. Ryan's now asking you all questions. Why don't you type in the chat
Yeah.
what level of degree or degree that you guys are thinking of applying for, if you know, and if you're thinking you're applying this year.
And if you think of any other scholarships you're applying for too, great.
And
MPhil.
we have Jack's doing an MPhil. Jack, are you thinking public health? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that general? Megan's doing an MPhil.
Perfect.
Erica's looking into PhD programs. Yep. Can you see these, Ryan?
I can't actually now.
Okay.
Well, I could sort of see it on the app. Yeah, Teresa, with the PhD, MD PhD, good. Grace, actually, with the MD PhD, that's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned it. Definitely you'll want to emphasize the PhD part. I know my interviewers, it's a very American thing to do the MD PhD, and I don't think they were as, and I've had a similar experience with others who've applied as the MD PhD. You'll really want to emphasize the PhD part, and then you'll say how that the PhD is the most important thing. If not, if you emphasize the MD, then they get scared off, at least at the Gates level sometimes. The PhDs too, also for the PhDs, definitely make sure to look into the potential supervisors. Send out emails. I know Eric and I took a similar idea with we sent an email at 7 a.m. their time so that the professors would always receive the email at the top of their mailbox. Same with the MPhils, actually. I think you said public health. You know, even having a professor there in public health to support your application that you can at least quote in your application, that will be ideal. Throw down as many names as you can who you've been in contact with that might be able to support your application. You know, that just shows that connection. I think it really helps. At least that's what I've seen.
Brian, did you find your connection at Cambridge on your own, sort of exploring the Cambridge website, or did you have faculty at USC that helped you network into that?
Yeah, that's a good point too. So when I was applying, like I said, I never even really knew exactly who to look out into. And so when I was applying, I was originally applying for like another degree. And I had reached out to the department, which I encourage all of you all to do. Reach out to the department, ask if you can speak to either, and actually Jen just mentioned it, yeah, ask if you could speak to, you know, a current student, a current GATE student who might be able to provide you perspective on the department. And when I had done that, the person actually was best friends with someone else in a completely different lab. Um, and she had put me in touch with this other gentleman, and he encouraged me to join that lab with a completely new supervisor. So I'd sent an email to that supervisor. He encouraged me to apply through him, and I completely dropped the other application. So you know, I would definitely consider, because definitely email the department. Someone's going to be there to be able to say, hey, you know, here's probably another student who you can talk to. Actually, I think that's pretty crucial. It's a pretty good crucial step. They can give you perspective on maybe what the faculty are like, and also in cold email some of the faculty members. People are going to say no. I had tons that told me no. It doesn't. They just don't have funding, or maybe they just don't need someone, or tons of reasons. But definitely send as many emails as possible to that.
Yeah, actually, you're reminding me, Ryan. I think that's how Eric got some information, Eric Bringley, because I think I remember him asking to talk to Gates students already in the lab and like worked that connection. So that's a really good tip.
Exactly. Actually, yeah, I think both me and Eric had that similar experience. Exactly. Yeah. We got it through the students currently.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to hear, and also don't be afraid to hear the no's. Like, never take it personally. These faculty are happy to help if they can, and if they don't, they're just busy people, and so it's not a reflection on you. So don't let that get you down if you send out emails and you're just getting not personal rejections, but just people declining. Let's say it takes some legwork to do that, but. And actually, Ryan, I love the tip about sending emails based on UK time so that you're at the top of their inbox in the morning. Like, that's just brilliant. I would not have thought of that.
I never did either. Eric was the one who encouraged that, and I think Eric, he had such a positive response from it. And I'll be honest, before I was doing that, I only received significantly less emails back than I did after that. It actually made a difference.
That is like a secret tip. I'm going to highlight that. We'll share that. That's worth everything else this conversation has been about, everybody. Send emails at the right time.
Exactly.
Very cool. All right. Any other questions? Go ahead, Jack. Yep.
So when you cold emailed the professors, did you just like ask to set up a time to speak with them over the phone, or did you like directly say you're interested in applying for the Gates and wanted to talk to them about that, or how did you sort of phrase the messages?
Yeah, great point too. So when actually I can reference Eric. Eric had sent me what his emails he had sent to the professor as well. And so we had phrased it as we were applying for Gates. That already makes happy, because then they might not have to worry about funding you. So you're applying for Gates, you were looking to look into some support, you were interested in the research. You can try to, some of each one's quite different. Some like you to like have some background in their research, but that's quite a task in order to do it. And instead, I would encourage having a more of a template email that talks about you wanting to apply. Maybe put one or two sentences about why that professor in general, from something you might have read from them, and then you can just say, are you considering anyone to possibly join the lab for this next year or the following year, whichever year you're applying for. And then you can use that same template and send it off to the other ones as well. And usually they'll have a personal assistant, a PA, who might email back, and they'll be like, hey, we're not looking for someone, or hey, we are. Sometimes they have on their websites that they are. But yeah, sometimes they usually don't like to talk at first. They'll just send a few emails back and forth. Sometimes they do. Some I've heard have like sort of interviews in a way where they want to talk to you. I've even met one person who had to present to the entire lab. as an interview process. So it very much depends. Instead, you can encourage them to, be like, hey, would you be interested in, I'd love to go into more detail over a phone call. But instead, I think the initial email would be more, are you looking for anyone this next year? And usually in their mind, they either have yes or no already set, even before you send an email.
Thank you.
That's all good advice. It's good advice, and it all just does vary. I think one thing any of you might want to do is actually, the Gates website does list all of the recipients. It's not the easiest thing to search through for any given year, but they might have the most current years, and so you can kind of see the distribution of all of the different programs that they're funding, which is usually pretty encouraging because it's a really wide range of programs that they're funding, right? This commitment to improving the lives of others can come in any discipline. But I think it's helpful to kind of see where people have been successful, just to give you some idea of what they're funding and what's possible. Other questions? I'm sorry. Yeah, there we go. Jack, I didn't know how to unraise your hand. I'm sorry. Other questions for Ryan? The applicant portal typically opens, Megan, soon. They were saying early September. I actually was impressed. I'm going to share my screen again. I was worried that they didn't even have their deadline up, but they have actually finally updated the Gates website with a campus with a deadline. Their timeline is now available, so that applications should open 1st of September. So next week. Application deadline is the 14th of October, and then they do interviews in December. They do interviews in January, but they notify you in December. It's all going to be virtual this year, I'm pretty sure, although it doesn't necessarily say that here. And it's kind of a quick turnaround, but it won't be long before the application is open. And what they're constrained by is that the application for Gates is actually the Cambridge application. So if you're on here and you want to apply, how to apply, it's going to kick you to the graduate admissions page at Cambridge. And so right now, I'm not sure that this is actually open, but you would search for your course and follow the instructions for how to apply. It's a pretty standard single application. On this page, I would also point you to over here, you've got this lovely Postgraduate Guide 2020. I have that open right here. It's a lovely 13-page brochure. I think this does a nice job of guiding you through just a kind of a big picture overview of graduate education at Cambridge. So it's not long, there's not a ton of crazy detail, but I think it's nice to get a sense of what they're known for, what they do, what types of courses there are. With the MPhils, right, you want to pay attention to things, to whether your MPhil has taught courses or if it's purely by research, because that's a difference between the US and the UK. Ryan, when you were doing your initial, because you went over to do your master's initially, were you doing a research or a taught MPhil?
Yeah, originally I was doing the half research, half taught one, and so that's why I think they really wanted to emphasize a lot of the research part of it. And then I ended up switching over to completely research, and that was that MPhil in chemistry. And so, yeah, it was a little bit different. I know that the other one I was playing, that one was more, they had you do a 2-page statement of your interest or something rather than a research proposal. I think that was the big difference. But yeah.
Sorry, y'all, I have shared the wrong tab. You're like, what brochure is she talking about? Here we go. Here, it's this lovely 13-page brochure, the Postgraduate Guide. I'm sorry. I'm still learning about Blackboard. But yeah, I would recommend looking at this if you can. It has information about student life. It has a little bit about how the application process works for the grad programs. Your deadline, you're following the Gates deadline. So Cambridge's deadline is actually later than October 14th. It's just if you want to be considered for the scholarship, that's the date you have to hit. And then they have this little like timeline of how they decide and make offers. There are other funding opportunities at Cambridge. So essentially, hopefully if you're applying for the Gates, you just really want to go to Cambridge. So anything you're eligible for, I would encourage you to check the box. Ryan, did you not also get the Cambridge Trust? I mean, you didn't ultimately, you couldn't take both, but weren't you offered both?
Exactly, yeah. So the Cambridge Trust one I was offered, I think that's given to 250 students or so from all across all the applicants for, I think that might have been, I think that was both PhD and MPhil, but I know I received it for the PhD, and then yeah, you can only accept you accept the Gates, and then yeah, but you automatically get considered for that one. Like Jen was just mentioning, there's so many different opportunities, which is nice.
Yeah. So you're not putting all your eggs in just the Gates basket. You're applying to Cambridge and saying, consider me for all the funding I'm eligible for, please. So that then they have this nice page, this little spread about colleges, which I just wanted to point out because I think that is something that we as Americans are not as familiar with, and it can be really daunting to investigate. So I think this gives you some ideas of what to look for. Ryan, thank you for offering to talk that through with some students, because I think it's hard outside to really get a sense of what the different personalities are in the colleges, but it is such an important component of essentially your social life, right, and where you live and where you eat on campus, that it's important to look at it. They say you can put down 2 choices for college. I think the stat was like 65% of people get either of their top 2 choices, but everybody else gets a college. So you won't be homeless at Cambridge. They will find you a spot. But I just wanted to point out this particular resource to you on the graduate admissions website. So I'm going to close that down.
Social parts really interesting. If you like a bigger college, you would maybe look at St. John's College, Trinity, King's. Those 3 are the big ones. If you wanted a smaller, more modern college, you would look at something like UofSC or Robinson, and those have been developed in the last 100 years rather than the last 500 or so, like the other ones I just mentioned.
Join a college older than your country. That's no.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I know that I have a lot of.
I guess I should say I'm in St. John's. Sorry, I was just going to mention I'm in St. John's College, and then Eric, he's in Robinson. So those are 2. If you wanted to reach out questions on the colleges, you could reach out to either 2 of us for those 2. But there's 29 other ones to look into as well. So many to choose from.
We have a tiny little ancient booklet in our office that describes the various colleges at Cambridge. That's I think from like 1970. So anyone is welcome to look at that, but I'm not sure how accurate it is. For all the colleges.
Yeah, I think Robinson was founded in like 1970, so that would.
Yeah, I think we don't even have all 31.
Yeah, I know each one is different. I mean, John's is known for more sports. King's is more liberal arts. Trinity's known for a lot of their maths and academics. A little bit more nerdy, but that's good. I mean, they're there to work, and. Yeah, Keys is another good one. So there's a lot of different ones to look into. But I know, like I said, I think Eric didn't put any on his top 2 preferences. So I think he said he wished he'd have done that. Yeah. So definitely put something.
Put something down. Yeah. All right, so just a quick sort of overview of the application. So the graduate school at Cambridge, it's usually like a personal statement essay. It's going to be a couple of letters of recommendation. Make sure that you have the appropriate background for the grad degree, right? They'll usually have eligibility requirements if they want a particular major or thing like that. We can help you figure that out if it's not super clear. And then the Gates application is an additional essay that addresses how do you match the 4 criteria that Gates has, and then it's an additional letter of reference. If you haven't seen that information, I will hopefully successfully share my screen again. This is not a smooth process. There's like multiple things to click. So here, the criteria, right? So academic excellence, as I mentioned, that's kind of a no-brainer because you have to get into Cambridge. So you definitely need to be able to have the academic expertise to be chosen. A reason that you actually chose that particular course, right? How does this fit into the big picture trajectory of where you've come from and what you've studied? Why have you chosen this course and where is it going to take you, right? So it needs to not just be a flight of fancy that like, oh, this course just sounds interesting. It's totally different than what I've done before. It can be a pivot from things you've done before, but you still have to have sufficient background to demonstrate that you can be successful and that you have a strong case for that particular course of study. That commitment to improving the lives of others, right? I mean, that used to kind of be the prompt for that essay. They've backed away from that, but I think this is still kind of this is the big question, right? What is it that you want to do to make the world a better place for human beings? However you address that. And that doesn't have to be purely academic, but it should partially be academic. And that capacity for leadership. So you don't have a lot of room in this essay. This is not a long essay to write to highlight these 4 things. But I would say with leadership, one thing you want to consider is it's much more effective to show a particular example of leadership, I think, than to talk about leadership broadly. It's also really useful for you to go ahead and define leadership in that particular part of the essay in whatever way you want to focus on, so that then you can demonstrate by your example how you have fulfilled that definition of leadership, right? Leadership is kind of a hard concept to get your hands around in terms of a complete definition. So you don't have to worry about having like the fullest definition of leadership ever. But if you can say something like, you know, a good leader is someone who listens to people and solves problems, then your example can be, here's a situation where I listened to people and here's the problem that I solved and here's how I did it. If you don't define leadership, everyone who's reading that might have a different conception of leadership that they are reading your essay, at the lens that they're reading your essay through. And so you may have lost them from the very beginning if they don't know or agree with your definition of leadership. If you define it from the beginning, they at least can see, okay, even if that's not what I think a leader is, you have done those things. But these are the 4 pieces that the essay wants you to address, right? Academic excellence, why that program at Cambridge is the right program for you, how you're going to help improve the lives of others, and that you can be a leader, right? Give them reasons to invest in you as a future graduate of Cambridge who's going to go out and do great things. So there's not a secret formula. These are what they're looking for. And it's a pretty short essay. So, you know, your application to Cambridge does not have to talk about any of these things, right? It should talk about the graduate program. It's just the Gates essay that addresses these 4 criteria. The same thing I'd want to highlight about the letters of recommendation, right? So I would watch the little video if you have time. It's a helpful video. So it's only 500 words is that essay. So it's like a page, single spaced. That's not a lot of space to answer those 4 criteria. If you're applying for a DPhil, you do have to have a research proposal because that's part of the Cambridge application. And then here's what they have to say about the reference, right? So your Cambridge application has to have 2 academic references. They need to be faculty who have taught you. It's not necessarily the case for your Gates Cambridge reference, right? So this can be someone who can speak a little bit more broadly about you. And Ryan, I don't remember or know who your Gates reference was, how they knew you. I know that Eric's Gates reference was actually Ashley Schreier in the undergraduate research office because he had done so much work as an ambassador for OUR, and part of his essay was focused on the work that he did in encouraging other students to do research. So it fit nicely in terms of what his area of emphasis was. Ryan, can I ask you to share your experience with that?
Yeah. So, my Gates reference letter was from Dr. Yanwen Wu. She was in the physics department. She had directly spoken with me through a society. So she actually had gone to Cambridge as well. So I think that a little bit helped and that. And I know there's a few faculty who have that might be helpful. And then the other 2 was my research advisor, Dr. Melissa Moss, and then my internship at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention supervisor. And so I had those 3 as mine.
Yeah. So the Cambridge is only going to look at the 2 references for the grad program. So you want those people to be those who can directly speak to your suitability for the grad degree. Gates is going to look at all 3, right? So think about the distribution of people the distribution of voices that you want in your application, because they will review it holistically. So who is someone who knows you well in a way that will be useful for Gates to understand you beyond what the other 2 letters will hopefully say about you. And that's a conversation we're happy to have with you, right? To talk through what some options might be and who the best choice might be for those letters of recommendation. So, but yeah, I mean, so if you'll see, they'll tell you, right? It doesn't have to be faculty. There's a wide range. But I do think, yeah, Ryan, that's a good point. Having someone who is at least familiar with Cambridge and the Cambridge style of education and things like that is not a bad thing. Certainly not a requirement. But there are people on campus here who might have that kind of experience, who, if they already are an option for you, might not be a bad idea to ask them, but don't feel like you have to seek out someone who went to write you this letter. It is 4:57 p.m. I want to say thank you to Ryan very much for sharing his time with us and giving us some good insight, and you always make me want to go to Cambridge. I'm going to give you all a last call. Are there any questions for Ryan, for me? Anything we can do to help you guys with your applications this year? Speak now. Nope. All right. I'm not going to force you guys to ask questions. Well,
I just want to say, I want to emphasize again, definitely feel free to reach out to me. And I know Eric, I'm sure, feels the same way. So definitely reach out to either Eric or I. Eric's still there at Cambridge, so he can still answer questions related to that. But I think, a lot of it is sort of just talking to as many people as possible and hoping for a response. And definitely sometimes, and I did as well, get intimidated by a lot of application processes. And exactly, yeah. Just definitely apply. I mean, this resource is available here, Jen, Novella, and them. I mean, it's phenomenal. So, yes. Yeah, thanks again for having me. Sorry for the poor connection as well.
It's all right. You're having a boating adventure, so we're all just a little jealous. I will mention both Ryan and Eric took up rowing as part of their Cambridge experience. So beware. Hopefully everyone on this call likes water in some way, shape, or form.
It's definitely something people enjoy coming in and trying, at least trying for the first time. Yeah, there.
Yep. Awesome. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Please feel sure to be in touch with questions. I'm going to try and send out a follow-up email. I may or may not have all your emails, so if you want to email me to make sure that I have you down as an applicant for Gates, that would be great, because then I'll make sure that I'm available to you. You can just send an email to our main office account, and they'll make sure I get it, and that's nfsp@sc.edu, so National Fellowships and Scholar Programs at sc.edu. But please, we are more than happy to help you with the Gates application, and we really hope that you apply and put yourself out there. We know it can be a scary thing to do, but we are confident that USC students can be Gates scholars. Clearly we have 2, and I think we can definitely have more. So just let me know how we can help, and thank you all for joining us. Thanks again to Ryan, and for those of you in Columbia, stay dry, because I think we have a monsoon outside. So take care, everyone. Thanks for coming, and hope to hear from you.